If I could take you into a time portal back to the 1980s, pre-Tim Burton's Batman, you would see a time period where the Caped Crusader was in desperate need of a rebranding. Because while it was wildly popular, the Adam West Batman series gave Batman a bit of a goofy image within mainstream media, and the character really desperately needed a much darker portrayal. And Tim Burton was absolutely the right person for the job. While I myself am not a massive fan of Burton's flair in general, he is truly an auteur in every sense of the word. He has a very unique style as a filmmaker and enmeshed with Batman in such a beautiful way. And before you furiously type in the comment section about how we had already gotten darker Batman portrayals in the comics prior to the Burton films, I fully acknowledge that this is true, but unfortunately a majority of the population does not read comics, and they didn't in the 1980s either. So at least from a mainstream media perspective, Adam West was probably what came to mind when they thought of The Dark Knight. And I would describe Batman 89 and Batman Returns as gothic. The building structures and general architecture, the way lighting is used throughout the film, the incredible Danny Elfman score, it all felt like a tasteful update on German Expressionism. I mean, just seek out something like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And using this style to capture Batman was perfect because it allowed for a more complex and psychologically driven portrayal of the character. Because this expressionist style with heavy shadows, exaggerated visuals, and a dystopian Gotham City created this alternate world in a sense. A world where you could actually believe a man could dress up like a bat and fight crime. And not only do this without looking ridiculous, but could actually become a symbol of fear that stunts crime in Gotham. And creating Gotham into a very unique setting is the biggest strength of the Tim Burton Batman films in my opinion. While I do think the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy is objectively better made in terms of the technical filmmaking aspect of things, and the decades between the two Batman runs certainly helped out with this, I do think that the biggest thing Burton did better was creating the setting of Gotham. Gotham feels like a place that simply doesn't or couldn't exist in our world. Whereas in the Nolan trilogy, it really just feels like we're in Chicago or any big city. It just 100% could exist in our world, and that escapism and true mystical element of setting is something I think we need to credit Burton for. Whereas Nolan sought to make Batman as realistic as possible so that he could be placed into a modern day city type of setting, Burton crafted an entirely new setting to specifically fit his version of Batman. And while your preference of the two will most certainly come down to your own taste in movies, I would argue that what Burton did was more impressive in many ways. And this more dramatic setting allowed for these larger-than-life villains such as the Joker and the Penguin to exist. Are either realistic or grounded takes on movie villains? Absolutely not. But they are both great and zany performances that mesh with Tim Burton's style perfectly. With any other Batman director, these performances simply wouldn't fit and would feel wildly out of place. And I also think that Batman 89 and Batman Returns were wildly influential movies in terms of what would be done with Batman moving forward in other mediums. The most important influence, of course, being Batman the Animated Series. Now, I grew up on Batman the Animated Series, and as a kid, I'd watch reruns of it on Boomerang constantly. But even now as an adult, the show still holds up and is the absolute height of Batman content. If you disagree with that, you can argue with a wall. And the style of the cartoon is absolutely Tim Burton influenced. The use of low-key lighting and sharp shadows to create a sense of mystery and intrigue around Batman, and to also highlight Bruce's abilities to blend into darkness and use the element of surprise as a weapon. And similar to what Tim Burton did in his films, this animated series uses the unique expressionist setting to house virtually all of Batman's rogues gallery of villains, in all of their over-the-top and larger-than-life glory. And influencing arguably the greatest animated show to ever exist has to be yet another feather in Tim Burton's cap. Now, there's a quote that has gotten Tim Burton quite a lot of flack amongst the comic enthusiast community, and this is when Burton boldly proclaimed to have never read a comic. And while I understand why some fans could interpret this as Burton blatantly disrespecting arguably the most iconic comic book character ever created, I actually find it to be really interesting. And I think this mindset is what helped make Burton's Batman films so good and unique. Because I think having a general lack of knowledge, in a weird way, allowed him to truly attempt to make Batman his own. While I'm sure he had a general understanding of the character, not having read a comic from start to finish meant that Tim was able to take his other influences and infuse them into the character. And I actually think a mindset like this is extremely beneficial when you're looking to adapt something onto the big screen. Because as much as I love comic books, you can't really ever make a one-to-one adaptation when trying to make a film out of them. You will always need to change some things, most of the time a lot of things, in order to fit the narrative structure of film. And since you have to do this anyways, I really think Burton's limited knowledge of Batman allowed him to create a new caped crusader in his own image. A unique image of Batman that would serve as a highly influential benchmark for the character. An image of Batman that would go on to influence Dark Knight content to this very day, in my humble opinion. Well, if you made it this far, please let me know in the comments, what do you think of Tim Burton's Batman films? Do you love the expressionist style of them, or are they perhaps a little too weird for you? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to check out some other Screen Stories content. I've made a number of Batman videos, and a playlist with all of them will be linked in the description. Until next time, peace.